Now, Israel and Hamas are reportedly closing in on a deal to release dozens of hostages. Up to 70 women and children may be released by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian women and children held in Israeli jails. Hamas's armed wing has accused Israel of procrastinating on the deal, which would include a truce of up to 3 to 5 days with Israel. We can now bring in Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin. Good to have you with us here on France 24. Now, in the first few weeks of this conflict, we saw 4 hostages released, 2 American citizens, and then we had 2 elderly Israeli women released. But since then, nothing. What, in your opinion, has taken so long?
Well, the primary reason why it took so long is that you cannot release hostages in an active war zone, to put it as simply as that. Hamas is holding these hostages, Israeli citizens and foreign nationals, as bargaining chips. They have held them as bargaining chips to try to get the releases of prisoners from Israeli detention. They have held them at one point to try to deter the ground offensive. They are holding them to try to get a cessation of the Israeli operations. But the fundamental is that if Israel continues to bomb and Israel continues to launch ground attacks throughout the Gaza Strip, there's no space to be able to complete the deal for the hostages and then to get them to a safe area. So that is why we're at this point with the reports today. And that is, if there's a humanitarian pause of 3 to 5 days, that not only is a pause that could get aid into Gaza, but it gives you the time to be able to move the hostages, whether it's 50, 60, 70, more or less, and possibly in exchange for women and children being freed from Israeli prisons.
But a 3 to 5 day pause does not mean Israeli forces would leave the Gaza Strip, does it?
No, absolutely not. And what we have to be clear here is that we are not talking about ceasefire. The Israeli leadership are vehemently rejecting any idea of that word, because it would indicate not only do you pause the conflict for a limited amount of time, but it means that the Israelis step back from their operations. The goal of the Israeli leadership, as expressed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, is still to destroy Hamas. And that raises an obvious issue. Given that Hamas is holding the hostages, how do you expect them to make concessions and release hostages when you're saying, but we're going to destroy you in the end?
Exactly. So what incentive does Hamas have to release the hostages if Israel keeps saying that our goal is to get rid of you?
In this case, it is immediately to show that they can get something for the hostages. So if they were able to get women and children out of Israeli prisons, they could celebrate, quote, a victory. They could say, look, to the civilians in Gaza, in the West Bank as well, where they hope to gain an influence, we can get things done. There is a further incentive, I think, keep your eyes and ears open for the idea that some hostages could be exchanged in exchange for Israel pulling back from Al-Shifa, around Al-Shifa Hospital, which your correspondents have just covered, because, of course, that siege is threatening hundreds of lives. So that could be another point where the hostages could be released. But I think the big question on the hostages is, do you get a humanitarian pause which is significant across all of the Gaza Strip beyond a few days? If you could do that, then I think all of the hostages could be released, and you open the possibility for a humanitarian pause turning into a ceasefire. But we are not there yet, not for a long shot, with the Israeli leadership in terms of how they see their operations proceeding.
I want to ask about the foreign nationals, because not only are there American nationals among the hostages, but we also have French nationals, we have Thai nationals. Are the French part of the discussions? And because from what I heard, the Thais have gone to Iran directly to negotiate to negotiate directly with Hamas.
Yeah, I mean, the main line of negotiations is still probably going through Qatar, but it is truly an international effort. Uh, Understandably, a lot of people focus on the Americans, Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, but you have got French diplomats who are involved in these discussions. You've got British diplomats involved, other European countries. The leader of Ireland, the Taoiseach, Michael Martin, is going to be in Israel and in Egypt tomorrow, and there is at least one Irish hostage that we know about. So this is not just simply a U.S. effort over the hostages and trying to get Israel to limit operations. It is still an international coalition which has been trying now for 6 weeks, well, almost 6 weeks, to try to get something to be able to safeguard the lives of civilians and hostages who, I will be honest with you, are being held as pawns both by Hamas and by the Israeli government.
And as all this continues, the situation at Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa Hospital, continues to worsen. Joe Biden has called for caution around this site, but Hamas has threatened to walk away. Given the situation at Al-Shifa, could this deal blow up in everyone's face?
Of course, the deal could actually wind up unraveling at any moment. We've been talking about possible hostage deals for more than a month, but the fact is that when the Israeli ground offensive took place more than 2 weeks ago, that immediately suspended any possibility of a deal. When we thought that talks could be revived, when you had hundreds of casualties in Jabalia refugee camp, that set the negotiations back. And I have to tell you that the most troubling statement today that could undo negotiations is from the Israeli finance minister, who said just a few hours ago that, in effect, all people, all Palestinians should leave Gaza, that there is no longer an independent entity in Gaza. In other words, if you call for Gaza to be depopulated, why should anyone negotiate with you for the release of the hostages? Because you're actually telling everybody, we don't recognize that you can live in this territory anymore.
I mean, it's not the first incendiary statement we've had coming out of Israeli officials, unfortunately. Scott Lucas, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.